The stars seemed to bend around the U.S. diplomatic resolution as it glided through the intricate web of hyperspace lanes. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood motionless, her reflection barely visible in the curved transparent alloy of the bridge's primary viewing panel. Behind her, a carefully selected crew moved with the precision of a symphony orchestra, each member a specialist, each action calculated. To the untrained eye, Rodriguez might have appeared calm, but those who knew her understood the storm of calculations brewing behind her dark eyes. Her family had been diplomats and problem solvers for generations, peacekeepers who understood that the most powerful weapon was never a gun, but understanding. The ship itself was a marvel of human engineering that defied traditional military design. Its exterior shifted subtly, microscopic adaptive panels responding to the slightest changes in radiation, temperature, and spatial conditions. What appeared to be smooth silver surfaces could instantaneously transform to optimize communication, deflect potential threats, or absorb and redistribute energy. Incoming transmission from Galactic Concordance Central, announced Lieutenant Marcus Chen, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to bloom from nothing. "They're not pleased with our approach." A holographic display materialized, showing the increasingly agitated representatives of multiple alien civilizations. The Concordance Communication Hub was designed to be the ultimate neutral ground, a place where conflicts were supposed to be resolved through endless bureaucratic debates. Humanity's direct intervention was about to turn that carefully maintained illusion upside down. Rodriguez allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile. Her mission wasn't about military might or territorial conquest. It was about solving a problem that had stumped the galaxy's most advanced civilizations for centuries. The conflict between the Zornak and Krelty was more than just a territorial dispute. It was a complex tapestry of cultural misunderstandings, historical traumas, and systemic failures that had resulted in the displacement of trillions and the destruction of entire planetary ecosystems. Conventional diplomatic approaches had failed repeatedly. Massive peacekeeping fleets had only escalated tensions. Military interventions had brought nothing but more suffering. Humanity had a different approach. Status of preliminary cultural analysis. Rodriguez called out, her voice steady and clear. Lieutenant Sarah Queasy, the ship's lead cultural xenopsychologist, responded immediately. Comprehensive profile complete. We've identified 372 potential communication vectors that previous diplomatic missions overlooked. The core issue isn't territorial. It's a fundamental misalignment of cultural narratives. The ship's computational systems were running millions of scenarios per second. But these weren't just cold calculations. Each scenario was a carefully constructed narrative that took into account the deepest psychological and cultural nuances of both civilizations. Zornak communication protocols are responding, Chen reported. They're confused. Our transmission doesn't match any known diplomatic communication format. That was precisely the point. The Zornak, a species of crystalline beings whose communication relied on complex light refraction and quantum entanglement, had never encountered an approach that didn't follow their rigid diplomatic protocols. The Krelty, a collective consciousness spread across multiple biomechanical platforms, operated on principles of absolute logical progression. Humanity offered something different, something unpredictable, something that defied their understanding of conflict resolution. As the U.S. diplomatic resolution approached the contested star system, its very presence was already changing the equation. No weapons were charged. No aggressive postures were assumed. Just an invitation to see the conflict from an entirely new perspective. All systems prepared for initial contact, Rodriguez said quietly. Let's remind the galaxy what diplomacy truly means. The stars outside seemed to hold their breath, waiting. The Galactic Concordance Council chamber resembled a living organism more than a meeting hall. Holographic representations of 12 distinct civilizations flickered and pulsed, each delegate a unique manifestation of their species' evolutionary journey. Crystal, energy, organic matter, and synthetic constructs, intermingled in a display of galactic diversity that would have been breathtaking if not for the current state of absolute chaos. Ambassador Krelax of the Zornak delegation stood at the center, his crystalline body casting prismatic reflections across the chamber. Each movement sent intricate light patterns dancing, a language more complex than any verbal communication. His laughter rang out, a sound like shattering glass and melodic wind chimes. "Humans," he proclaimed, his voice translated through a dozen linguistic matrices. "A species that only recently achieved interstellar travel. They propose to resolve a conflict that has consumed 3 star systems and displaced trillions." The Krelti representative, a collective consciousness manifested as a shimmering humanoid construct of interconnected biomechanical nodes, remained silent. But beneath the surface, quantum computations were running at an unprecedented rate, analyzing every possible implication of the human intervention. Around the chamber, the delegates represented civilizations that had existed for millennia. The Vornai, energy-based life forms that communicated through quantum entanglement. The Silicon Collective, a civilization of sentient computational matrices. The Biological Confluence, a species that existed as a networked organic intelligence. Each had their own perspective, their own history of failed interventions. Historical records announced the Concordance's central eye, its voice a neutral blend of every known galactic language, indicate 0 successful diplomatic resolutions by human representatives in large-scale interstellar conflicts. Ambassador Krelax's crystalline form vibrated with derision. Precisely. What could these young, primitive beings possibly understand about our complex cultural and territorial disputes? Deep within the chamber, a holographic representation of the contested star systems materialized. 3 entire solar systems locked in a conflict so intricate that it had become a study of perpetual motion. Each action creating an equal and opposite reaction, a cycle of retribution that had lasted for countless generations. The Zornak and Krelti had been fighting so long that the original cause of their conflict had become mythological. Territory meant nothing. Resources were inconsequential. This was about pride, about cultural identity, about the very essence of survival. The silicon-based diplomat from the mechanical kingdom spoke next, its voice a precise mathematical calculation. Probability matrices suggest a 0.37% chance of successful resolution by human intervention. Historical diplomatic precedent clearly indicates a sudden interruption. The chamber's communication systems flickered. For precisely 3.7 standard minutes, every holographic display, every quantum communication channel, every distributed intelligence network went silent. When the systems restored, a transmission from the human vessel played. But it wasn't a traditional diplomatic message. It was something else entirely, a complex narrative that seemed to weave through cultural memories, historical traumas, and potential futures. The delegates fell silent. Ambassador Krelax's crystalline form momentarily lost its precise geometric structure, a rare display of genuine confusion. The Krelti Collective's biomechanical nodes pulsed with unexpected algorithmic patterns. What they were witnessing defied every known protocol of diplomatic engagement. The human ship hadn't sent a message. It had sent an invitation, not to negotiate, but to understand. Not to compromise, but to reimagine. And in that moment, something fundamental began to shift in the vast, intricate machinery of galactic diplomacy. The misconceptions were about to be challenged. The contested star system was a graveyard of broken dreams and forgotten hopes. Countless abandoned space stations drifted like silent monuments to generations of conflict. Fractured planetary rings cast ethereal shadows across depleted asteroid fields, each fragment a testament to centuries of mutual destruction. Lieutenant Marcus Chen's fingers moved with surgical precision across the ship's communication interface. Transmission sequence initiated, he called out. Quantum encryption is non-standard. Captain Rodriguez watched the holographic displays with an intensity that belied her outward calm. The transmission wasn't just a message. It was a carefully constructed narrative ecosystem, a communication so complex it would challenge everything the Zornak and Krelty understood about interaction. The Krelty defensive platforms began to power up. Millions of quantum-linked weapon systems hummed to life, their targeting matrices locking onto the human vessel. Centuries of conflict had taught them that any approaching ship was a potential threat. But this was different. The first wave of transmission began not with words, but with an intricate mathematical sequence that simultaneously served as a communication protocol, a cultural translation matrix, and a psychological bridge. It was a language that existed between mathematics, emotion, and pure information. Lieutenant Sarah Kwesi monitored the cultural resonance systems. "Initial response is fascinating," she reported. "The transmission is causing quantum-level perturbations in their communication networks. We're not just sending a message, we are rewriting their understanding of communication itself." The holographic displays began to shift. What started as a complex mathematical sequence began to transform, mathematical patterns bleeding into visual representations, then into something that defied traditional communication methods. Historical moments began to appear. Not just text or images, but immersive narratives that captured the emotional essence of specific events. The transmission showed the first conflict between the Zornak and Krelty not as a battle, but as a profound misunderstanding. It revealed shared traumas, missed connections, potential moments of unity that had been overlooked for generations. "They're trying to block the transmission," Chen reported, a hint of excitement in his voice. "But our signal is adaptive. It's finding new pathways faster than their defensive systems can respond." The ship's communication systems were alive, a living, breathing entity that was part technology, part cultural analysis, part pure imagination. Each moment of the transmission adjusted itself based on the micro-responses from the receiving civilizations. On the Krelty defensive platforms, quantum computers began to experience something unprecedented. The transmission was not just a message, it was a living puzzle that rewrote their understanding of communication with each passing microsecond. The Zornak communication arrays, designed to refract and analyze light-based information at quantum speeds, found themselves processing something entirely new. The transmission moved through their systems like water through stone, finding paths where no paths existed before. Captain Rodriguez allowed herself a slight smile. This was humanity's true strength. Not military might, but the ability to see connections where others saw only division. "Full narrative sequence engaged," Kwesi announced. "We're achieving multiple simultaneous communication objectives." The transmission was a symphony of information. Mathematical patterns danced with emotional narratives. Historical contexts intertwined with potential futures. It was an invitation, not to surrender, not to compromise, but to understand. For the first time in centuries, the Zornak and Krelty found themselves seeing their conflict from an entirely new perspective. The human ship hung in space, a silent messenger of possibility. And everything was about to change. Deep within the U.S. diplomatic resolution, a room unlike any other spacecraft control center existed. Soft lighting pulsed in subtle patterns, adaptive neural interfaces lined the walls, and holographic displays flickered with a complexity that defied traditional technological understanding. Lieutenant Sarah Kwesi stood at the center of what the crew called the narrative realignment chamber. Her fingers danced across quantum adaptive interfaces, weaving together a tapestry of cultural understanding that was equal parts science, art, and pure human intuition. Psychological resonance at 62.4%, she murmured, her eyes reflecting complex holographic patterns. "We're breaking through their defensive narratives." The narrative realignment protocol was more than a communication strategy. It was a radical reimagining of conflict resolution, a method that treated historical trauma, cultural misunderstandings, and collective pain as living, malleable systems rather than fixed historical facts. On the primary display, centuries of conflict unfolded like a living map. The transmission from the human ship wasn't just presenting information, it was creating a shared experiential space where the Zornak and Krelty could simultaneously experience their conflict from multiple perspectives. Captain Rodriguez watched from the observation deck, understanding the delicate nature of what her team was attempting. This wasn't manipulation. This was profound empathy at a civilizational scale. First contact point identified, Queasy announced. The initial misunderstanding between the Zornak and Krelty occurred during a resource exchange 743 years ago. But it wasn't a deliberate act of aggression. It was a fundamental communication breakdown. A holographic display began to shift. What had appeared to be a moment of conflict now revealed layers of complexity. A Zornak trade delegation had misinterpreted a Krelty communication protocol. What seemed like an aggressive act was actually a profound cultural misunderstanding. "We're creating a shared experiential matrix," Lieutenant Marcus Chen added, monitoring the quantum communication systems. "They're not just receiving information. They're experiencing a collective memory reconstruction." The ship's systems were doing something unprecedented. They were presenting historical moments, not as fixed events, but as living, malleable experiences. Each civilization could simultaneously experience the conflict from multiple perspectives: their own, their opponents, and a completely neutral viewpoint. Quantum entanglement met psychological analysis. Mathematical precision danced with emotional intelligence. The transmission was rewriting the very language of conflict. On the Zornak communication platforms, crystal-based quantum computers began to resonate with frequencies they had never experienced. The Krelty collective consciousness found itself confronting historical narratives that challenged everything they believed about their conflict. Emotional resonance increasing, Queasy reported. "We're moving beyond intellectual understanding into shared emotional experience." The human approach was radical. Instead of presenting arguments or proposing solutions, they were creating a space of mutual understanding. It was less about winning and more about truly seeing each other. Captain Rodriguez understood something fundamental about conflict that most diplomatic missions missed. Conflict wasn't about resources or territory. It was about unheard stories, unacknowledged pain, and missed opportunities for connection. Narrative integration at 78.6%, Chen called out. They're starting to see each other as beings, not enemies. The U.S. diplomatic resolution hung in space, not as a weapon, not as a threat, but as a bridge between civilizations, a living testament to humanity's most powerful capability: the ability to understand, to empathize, to reimagine. Something fundamental was changing in the vast, intricate machinery of galactic relations, and humanity was just getting started. The engineering deck of the U.S. diplomatic resolution was unlike any technological space in the known galaxy. It wasn't a cold, mechanical environment, but a living, breathing ecosystem of innovation. Adaptive interfaces shifted and transformed, responding to the slightest changes in computational requirements, scientific hypotheses, and diplomatic challenges. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, no relation to the captain, but equally brilliant, stood at the center of this technological marvel. Her team wasn't just solving problems. They were reimagining the very concept of problem-solving. "Initial systemic analysis complete," she announced, her voice calm but charged with excitement. "We're not just addressing symptoms. We're redesigning the entire social infrastructure that perpetuates the conflict." The ship's computational systems were running millions of scenarios per second, but these weren't simple military strategies or diplomatic algorithms. Each calculation was a complex, living model that took into account cultural nuances, historical traumas, economic dependencies, and potential collaborative futures. On the primary holographic display, a living map of the contested star systems began to take shape. It wasn't a static representation, but a dynamic model that pulsed and shifted with real-time data. Resource distribution patterns, communication networks, economic dependencies, all became visible in ways neither the Zornak nor the Krelty had ever conceived. "Look here," Dr. Rodriguez pointed to a series of interconnected nodes that represented critical infrastructure. "The conflict isn't just about territory. It's about access to regenerative resources that both civilizations critically need. Lieutenant Marcus Chen integrated the computational models with cultural analysis systems. We're identifying shared challenges that have been obscured by generations of conflict, he reported. There are at least 247 potential collaborative solutions that no previous diplomatic mission even considered. The technological intervention was radical. Instead of imposing a solution, the human ship was creating a framework that made collaboration not just possible, but the most logical path forward. Adaptive algorithms began to emerge, systems that could redistribute resources, optimize communication networks, and create economic models that benefited both civilizations. These weren't rigid structures, but living, breathing frameworks that could adjust in real time. On the Krelty communication platforms, their collective consciousness began to experience something unprecedented. The human technological approach wasn't about domination or control. It was about creating possibilities. The Zornak crystal-based computational systems found themselves processing information in ways they had never imagined. Complex mathematical models revealed intricate connections that generations of conflict had obscured. Collaborative potential index rising, Chen announced. We're demonstrating that cooperation is mathematically more beneficial than continued conflict. Dr. Rodriguez smiled. This was humanity's true strength, the ability to see connections where others saw only division. Technology wasn't just about processing power, it was about imagination. The ship began deploying microscale intervention technologies, quantum-linked communication enhancers, adaptive resource distribution networks, economic modeling systems that could predict and prevent potential conflict triggers. We're not solving their problems, Dr. Rodriguez explained to Captain Rodriguez, who was observing the intervention. We're giving them the tools to solve their own problems. Each technological solution was a bridge. Each algorithm was an invitation to understand. The human ship wasn't conquering, it was connecting. Quantum computers danced with cultural analysis systems, mathematical precision intertwined with emotional intelligence. Technology became a language of possibility. The contested star systems began to transform, not through force, not through imposed solutions, but through the most powerful technology of all, understanding. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would be the same again. Silence descended across the contested star systems. It was a silence unlike any that had existed before, pregnant with possibility, charged with unspoken potential. The leaders of the Zornak and Krelty civilizations found themselves in a shared communication space that defied every previous understanding of diplomatic engagement. Holographic representations flickered. The Zornak ambassador's crystalline form casting prismatic reflections, the Krelty collective consciousness manifesting as an intricate network of shimmering nodes. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched from the bridge of the U.S. diplomatic resolution, understanding that this moment was more delicate than any military engagement. Transformation wasn't about winning. It was about seeing. First Joint Resource Assessment beginning. Lieutenant Marcus Chen announced, his voice a mixture of excitement and professional calm. They're actually talking, not arguing. Talking. The human ship had done something extraordinary. It hadn't forced a solution. It had created a space where solution became the most natural outcome. The Zornak ambassador, Krelax, whose crystalline body had once resonated with derision, now found himself examining shared historical moments with a perspective he had never considered. The quantum adaptive transmission continued to reveal layers of misunderstanding that had fueled generations of conflict. We believe their initial resource claim was an act of aggression, Krelax said, his crystalline form shifting with what could only be described as something close to remorse. But now we see it was a desperate attempt at survival. The Krelty collective consciousness responded, not with hostility, not with defense, but with understanding. Our initial defensive response escalated a misunderstanding into generations of conflict, the collective acknowledged. The very language of their communication was changing, becoming something more fluid, more connected. Lieutenant Sarah Kwesi monitored the psychological resonance systems. Emotional breakthrough at 93.2%, she reported softly. They're experiencing genuine empathy. The technological interventions had created more than just a communication channel. They had created a shared experience space where both civilizations could simultaneously understand their own history and their opponent's perspective. Resources that had once been points of contention now became potential points of collaboration. Planetary systems that had been battlegrounds were now being viewed as shared opportunities for development. We're identifying at least 147 collaborative infrastructure projects, Chen continued. Renewable energy systems that benefit both civilizations, shared scientific research initiatives, communication network expansions. Captain Rodriguez understood the profound nature of what was happening. This wasn't about winning. This was about reimagining possibility. The Zornak and Krelty were discovering something fundamental, that their differences were far less significant than their shared challenges. Generations of conflict had obscured their potential for collaboration. Our historical narratives were never about actual differences, the Krelty collective observed. They were about fear, about misunderstanding. Krelax's crystalline form pulsed with a frequency that suggested something close to emotional revelation. "We have lost so much time," he said. "So many generations." The human ship hung in space, a silent witness to a transformation that would reshape galactic understanding. On the bridge, Captain Rodriguez allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its technology. It had always been its capacity to imagine different possibilities. The contested star systems began to pulse with a new energy, not the energy of conflict, but the energy of potential. Something fundamental was changing in the vast, intricate machinery of galactic relations, and humanity had just begun to show what was possible. The first joint research station was nothing short of a miracle. Floating between the disputed star systems, it represented more than just a scientific outpost. It was a living testament to the power of understanding. Zornak crystal-based researchers worked alongside Krelty biomechanical scientists, their workstations a stunning blend of technologies that had once been locked in generations of conflict. Holographic interfaces shifted and adapted, creating communication spaces that transcended traditional linguistic and technological barriers. Dr. Eliana Martinez, the human liaison assigned to the station, watched with a mixture of professional pride and a genuine wonder. This wasn't just a diplomatic success, it was a fundamental reimagining of interspecies collaboration. "Quantum entanglement communication network stabilizing," announced Dr. Carell, a Krelty researcher whose collective consciousness had become one of the most vocal advocates for collaboration. Transmission efficiency increased by 427% compared to previous independent research efforts. The research station became a beacon of possibility. Projects that had seemed impossible now emerged with startling rapidity. Shared environmental restoration technologies, collaborative quantum computing initiatives, adaptive resource management systems that benefited both civilizations. Our previous approach was fundamentally flawed. Krelax, the Zornak ambassador, explained during a joint press conference broadcast across multiple star systems. His crystalline form now refracted light in patterns that suggested something close to emotional vulnerability. We saw differences as threats. Humanity showed us they could be opportunities. The human ship had done something extraordinary. It hadn't conquered. It had connected. Lieutenant Sarah Kwesi continued to monitor the psychological dynamics of the emerging collaboration. Cultural integration metrics are unprecedented, she reported to Captain Rodriguez. We're seeing genuine cross-cultural understanding emerge in real time. Cultural exchange programs began to take shape. Zornak students started studying Krelty adaptive technologies. Krelty researchers explored the intricate quantum communication methods of the Zornak. What had once been viewed as alien and threatening now became a source of mutual fascination. The technological interventions continued to reveal deeper connections. Resource distribution models showed how generations of conflict had prevented both civilizations from addressing critical challenges. Climate restoration projects, Interstellar infrastructure development. Shared scientific research that pushed the boundaries of known technology. We're not just resolving a conflict, Dr. Martinez explained during a briefing. We're creating a new model of interstellar cooperation. The Galactic Concordance watched in stunned silence. Other civilizations began to take notice. The human approach wasn't about military might or technological superiority. It was about something far more powerful: the ability to see beyond immediate differences. On the bridge of the U.S. diplomatic resolution, Captain Rodriguez understood the profound nature of what was happening. This was more than a diplomatic mission. This was a fundamental reimagining of how civilizations could interact. Collaborative Potential Index continuing to rise. Lieutenant Chen reported, "We're seeing emergent technologies that neither civilization could have developed independently." The research station became a symbol of hope. Holographic displays showed collaborative projects that merged Zornak crystal technologies with Krelty adaptive systems. Planetary restoration initiatives. Shared scientific discoveries that pushed the boundaries of known physics. What had begun as a seemingly impossible diplomatic mission was transforming into something much larger. A new way of understanding. A new approach to interstellar relations. The human ship hung in space, a silent guardian of possibility. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The ripples of change had only just begun. The Galactic Concordance Hall fell silent as Captain Alina Rodriguez prepared to deliver her final report. Holographic representations of 12 different civilizations flickered around her, a living tapestry of galactic diversity that seemed to hold its collective breath. She was not a conqueror. She was not a warrior. She was something far more powerful, a bridge builder. Conflict is a failure of imagination. Rodriguez began, her voice steady and clear. Humanity brings imagination. The U.S. diplomatic resolution had done more than resolve a single conflict. It had fundamentally challenged every existing paradigm of interstellar diplomacy. The Zornak and Krelty Research Station now stood as a living testament to what was possible when civilizations chose understanding over division. Lieutenant Sarah Queasy stood beside her, monitoring the psychological resonance of the transmission. The communication was more than a report. It was a blueprint for a new way of thinking. Dr. Ileana Martinez had compiled the preliminary research findings. The collaborative technologies developed during the intervention had already produced breakthrough discoveries in quantum communication, environmental restoration, and adaptive resource management. Technologies that neither civilization could have developed independently were now emerging at an unprecedented rate. We did not solve their problems, Rodriguez explained to the assembled delegates. We provided them with the tools to solve their own problems. The difference is critical. The Zornak ambassador, Krelax, whose crystalline form now seemed to pulse with a newfound sense of possibility, spoke next. His light-refracting body cast prismatic reflections across the Concordance Hall, a visual representation of the transformation that had occurred. Humanity showed us something we had forgotten, Krelax declared. Conflict is not our natural state. Connection is. The Krelty collective consciousness integrated its perspective, its biomechanical nodes creating a complex holographic representation that seemed to breathe with new understanding. Our previous approach was fundamentally limited. The collective acknowledge. We saw boundaries where we should have seen possibilities. Lieutenant Marcus Chen continued to analyze the ongoing impact. The Collaborative Potential Index was rising exponentially. Shared scientific initiatives, cultural exchange programs, economic models that prioritized mutual growth over competitive isolation. This is not about a single diplomatic mission, Captain Rodriguez continued. This is about reimagining how civilizations can interact. The human approach had been radical in its simplicity. They hadn't brought weapons. They hadn't imposed solutions. They had created a space for understanding, a technological and psychological framework that made collaboration the most logical path forward. Other civilizations in the Galactic Concordance began to take notice. The Silicon Collective, the Biological Confluence, the Vornai Energy Networks, each began to reconsider their own approach to conflict and cooperation. The U.S. diplomatic resolution hung in space, a symbol of a new way of thinking. Not a weapon of war, but a vessel of possibility. "We are not here to conquer," Rodriguez said, her final words resonating through the Concordance Hall. "We are here to connect." The holographic displays began to shift. Collaborative project models, shared research initiatives, cultural exchange programs that promised to transform entire civilizations. What had once seemed impossible was now becoming inevitable. On the bridge of the ship, the crew understood something profound. Humanity's greatest strength was never about technological superiority or military might. It was about the ability to imagine different possibilities. The contested star systems pulsed with new energy. The research station continued its work. Zornak and Krelty scientists worked side by side, their previous hostilities becoming a distant memory. A new cosmic order was emerging, and humanity had only just begun to show what was possible.